And with that, let me turn now to our guests. We're very pleased to have with us today the Deputy Director General for Operations of the International Organization for Migration, Ugochi Daniels, who will join us from Geneva. He will go first. After him, you will hear from UNHCR's Deputy High Commissioner, Kelly Clements, who will contact us from Nairobi. Then third, you will hear from Ted Chaiban, UNICEF's Deputy Executive Director for Humanitarian Action and Supply Operations, who will be speaking to us from N'Djamena. And last, you will hear from the World Food Programme's Assistant Executive Director, Valerie Guarnieri, who will talk to us from Rome. So first off, let's put Mr. Daniels on the screen.
Farhad, can you hear me?
Ms. Daniels on the screen. Yes, hi.
Okay, thank you. Welcome to our joint briefing, and thanks everyone for joining. It's no coincidence that the four agencies represented here, UNHCR, UNICEF, WFP, and IOM, have all been in Sudan recently. Now in its third year of war, Sudan is the world's worst displacement crisis. Over 30 million people are in need of humanitarian assistance, and we've recorded 9.6 million internally displaced people and 4.3 million people who are displaced across borders in neighboring countries. And this is made all the worse by food insecurity, disease outbreaks, flooding, grave human rights violations, widespread damage to the infrastructure, and the near collapse of most of the most essential services. And that's why an interagency approach is critical, and why four agencies jointly address you today, and why Sudan needs our attention and solidarity. When I was there a week ago, I met with displaced people returning to their homes, and this is a testament to the resilience of the Sudanese people. 2.6 million people have now returned home in Sudan. In Khartoum alone, 1 million people have returned, the vast majority of whom, 94%, have come from other locations in Sudan. Sudan urgently needs to rehabilitate its key infrastructure, restore access to public services, and provide direct support to vulnerable returnees, IDPs, and the communities that host them. I had the opportunity to commission a solarized water facility when I was in Khartoum, and it's in an area that has the highest rates of cholera and a very high number of people who have returned. And it's linked to the city's water supply. So it's addressing the urgent humanitarian needs, but also contributing to the long-term development solutions that the people of Sudan need. And in November, with support from the African Development Bank, we're going to build the capacities of local authorities and rehabilitate key health, education, and water infrastructure in Al Jazeera, White Nile, River Nile, and Sennar states. Humanitarian development and peace actors must work together to address the needs in Sudan. And now I end with a call to action, because the humanitarian needs in Sudan are dire. I repeat the United Nations Secretary General's call for immediate cessation of hostilities, the protection of civilians, unhindered humanitarian access, and simplified procedures for aid delivery. Ted from UNICEF is going to speak to this in greater detail, but for now, I hand over to my colleague, Kelly from UNHCR. Kelly, we can't hear you.
Thank you very much. Thanks, Ugo, and greetings to you all. Yesterday, I returned from a 5-day trip to Sudan, where I visited Port Sudan and Khartoum. It was a joint visit with one of our steadfast supporters and strategic partners, the EU's humanitarian arm, ECHO. The objective of the joint visit was to bring visibility to the protection crisis in Sudan, as Ugo said, the world's largest. And this week, I have to say, will stay with me. The horrific stories of rights violations, the fear, the utter destruction of infrastructure and services, but also the resilience of the people. Ugo outlined the numbers in great detail. We know that the Sudanese people continue to bear the heavy cost of the fighting, and those numbers tell a story. Since April of 2023, 12 million are forced to flee their homes inside and outside the country. That's 1 in 3 Sudanese who are displaced. But I really want to talk about the people that we met behind the numbers. In Port Sudan, we spoke with displaced families, many having to flee multiple times, like Fatima. She fled El Fasher with her family. She left her husband and son, who were killed. And they walked for days, she and the 18 members of her extended family, without food before they reached safety. She arrived in Port Sudan, where she finally felt safe. The protection risks for women and girls in this conflict are as infuriating as they are heartbreaking. The use of rape as a weapon of war, the trauma from horrific human rights violations are producing scars that may never heal. In Khartoum, we witnessed the widespread destruction after more than 2 years of war. As Ugo said, without electricity, clean water, schools, healthcare, other essential services, very hard to rebuild. There are still remnants of war and scarce basic services that make life difficult. And as Ugo said, development investment along with humanitarian support is essential. The people that we saw returning represent a fragile but hopeful shift. Shops are reopening and school children are on their way to class. Ordinary life is returning a little bit amidst the rubble. What the women that we talked to told us that they decided to return because life was difficult in exile. Others came back with the hope that their children could go back to school or that they could reoccupy abandoned property. Their biggest concerns, basic services that weren't available, and still they are worried about their security. While we were there were drone attacks near the airport in Khartoum City. Many returnees are remaining on the outskirts where services and access are more reliable, but it puts strain on the communities. We can't wait for long-standing peace to take hold. Development actors are needed now to come in for bigger rehabilitation and construction and investment so that people can rebuild their lives with dignity. Yesterday in Port Sudan, we met refugees hosted by Sudan. It's not widely talked about, but it's important to note that despite the war and the challenging context, Sudan continues to host nearly 900,000 refugees and asylum seekers, mostly from South Sudan, Ethiopia, and Eritrea. We went yesterday morning to a refugee gathering site just outside Port Sudan. And there I met Rosa, a refugee from South Sudan who's lived her entire life in Sudan. But she was also displaced by the conflict, and she told us of her fear for her future and that of her children. She's wondering now what's to become of refugees who are also suffering because of the war. Sudanese communities have been amazing with their generosity, but they are facing growing hardships themselves. We're concerned about anti-foreigner sentiment rising in Khartoum, and that this will affect Sudan's long-standing support for refugees. That is under pressure. Despite the ongoing war and the security risks, refugees inside Sudan can't be forgotten. We remain committed, along with other partners, to work with officials to ensure that refugees receive continued protection, aid, and are treated with dignity and respect. Without safe access and adequate resources, more people will be forced to flee and suffer, and a political solution is absolutely needed. They need peace, and they need it now. Thank you.
Ted Chaiban from UNICEF.
Thank you for joining us today, and I want to build on what Ugo and Kelly spoke to. I speak to you a day after leaving Khartoum, following a mission that also took me to. I speak to you a day after leaving Darfur, following a mission that also took me to Khartoum. What I saw was alarming. Sudan is the world's largest humanitarian crisis. The conflict is escalating, and children are paying the highest price. Every day, violence is tearing communities apart. In Jebel Marra, I spoke to women with their children fleeing the siege in Al Fasher. getting through a gauntlet of armed checkpoints and stripped of all their belongings and money, harassed and attacked, shattered and left with nothing. I heard harrowing accounts of families who had gone hungry for days. In Darfur and the Kordofan, severe acute malnutrition is soaring. 1.4 million children live in areas of famine or at risk of famine. Thousands will die without urgent treatment. In North Darfur alone this year, 150,000 children are likely to suffer from severe acute malnutrition, the deadliest form. In Tawila, cases have surged from hundreds to over 2,000 a month since April. Tawila is the main place where people fleeing Fasher have gathered. Parents told me their children have not been in a classroom for years. This is a reality for millions. A staggering 14 million children out of school, 4 out of every 5 children in Sudan, an entire generation lost without learning. Diseases everywhere. You have cholera, diphtheria, malaria, dengue, and all are claiming young lives as the health system collapses. Violence robs children of safety, with at least 350 grave violations, including killing and maiming, verified in North Darfur in just this last 6 months. And we have to remember that Al Fasher is a city under siege for more than 16 months, 250,000 people trapped, cut off from food, water, and healthcare, with no safe way in or out. And yet, amid this devastation that I witnessed, I also saw resilience. Communities repairing schools so their children could resume their education. In a child-friendly space, children laughed and played. They drew homes they have lost and dreams for the future. I met UNICEF staff, our UN colleagues, and their partners who are making a difference every day. Despite unmanageable challenges, delivering oral cholera vaccines and bed nets to 8 million people to fight cholera and malaria. They're treating more than 750,000 children against severe acute malnutrition. And they've repaired and installed water systems, so 11 million people have water, including returnees. But urgent needs grow every day. And what Sudan needs is unfettered access, funding, and a political way towards the end of the conflict. Over to Valerie.
Thank you, Ted, and I'm glad to be with you, with Kelly, and with Ugo, and speaking alongside all of us. Sudan is clearly a top priority for us all and our organizations. It was a really grave moment when famine was first confirmed in parts of Sudan, and given the scale and growing intensity of the crisis, we have all been investing significant effort in enhancing our operational capacity to meet the huge and growing needs. I saw this during my visit in Khartoum and Port Sudan. We heard it now from Ted, and I hear it from our team and partners in Darfur. In recent months, WFP has reached over 4 million people each month with urgent food and nutrition assistance, double last year's reach. And this progress has been made possible through the incredible work of staff and partners on the ground. But it has been difficult, and the risks are high. Our team and partner colleagues have paid with their lives while delivering assistance for the people of Sudan. Darfur, as Ted highlighted, is one of the key areas of concern. At the start of the conflict, reaching the region was extremely difficult. It's still not easy, but using both food and cash transfers, we're now consistently reaching people at scale, more than 2 million people in Darfur. And in September, in areas declared or at risk of famine, we've reached 1.8 million people, over 85% of the population assessed as facing famine-level conditions in these locations. Not long ago, the coverage in these areas was below 20%. So through persistence and progress, we're closing the gap through a coordinated effort with partners. But humanitarian access remains a critical issue. In Al-Fasher, Kadugli, and Dilling, it remains severely constrained. A sizable convoy to Al Fashir is prepared and ready to go, but it's not yet been possible to deliver. And we're ready to move the moment safe passage is assured and do our best with the resources we have to support people who have fled the area. Now, while there are massive, immediate humanitarian needs in Sudan, on my visit and on the visit of all of us, we saw resilience, recovery, and we also have some agricultural opportunity. With partners like the World Bank, an initial restart of safety nets is underway in multiple locations. There's strong potential to scale, especially in urban centers and areas with significant returns like Khartoum and Wad Madani. And with the African Development Bank, FAO, and others, WFP is working with hundreds of thousands of farmers in the more fertile regions to raise productivity, currently focused on wheat and sorghum, with plans to expand to other crops. A portion of this production is purchased locally to support other parts of the Sudan facing more severe food insecurity. And investing in productive capacity alongside humanitarian needs feeds communities today and lays the foundation for a more self-reliant tomorrow. Now, although today is a joint UN agency briefing, I want to emphasize that the most inspiring response to the crisis is being led by the Sudanese people themselves. And I am proud, and we're all proud, to be working alongside community groups and local nonprofit organizations coming together for the people of Sudan. No single actor can meet today's scale and complexity alone, and the role of local actors has been and continues to be key in reaching people and delivering hope. So just closing to reemphasize the call to action that Ugo highlighted earlier, what Sudan needs now is an immediate end of hostilities and for civilians to get the protection they deserve, unhindered humanitarian access to all affected populations, including a UN presence throughout the country, simplified procedures for aid delivery and staff movement, an urgent and flexible funding to scale up life-saving and life-changing interventions, support for durable solutions for displaced populations, including returnees and host communities, and continued support for internally displaced populations and the nearly 900,000 refugees inside Sudan and Sudanese refugees in other countries in need of international protection and services. I will finish there. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you. I'd like to thank all four speakers, and I'll turn the floor over for questions. Please, when you're asking a question, specify which of the four speakers you are addressing your questions to. Okay. Yes, Noreen.
Thank you very much. My name is Noreen Hussein with IPS News. My question is directed to Ms. Clements. I just want to touch on a point that you made during your statement where you said, and I quote, "Development actors are needed now to come in for bigger rehabilitation and construction," and so on. So can you just clarify whether you were suggesting that development actors or groups should come in during an active hostilities are taking place, or they should come in right after a cessation of the hostilities? Thank you.
Thank you very much for the question. You know, Sudan is not a monolith in terms of the country itself, and there are parts of the country that are very peaceful. And in some areas, for example, in White Nile, there have been South Sudanese refugees that have been living with Sudanese host communities now for a very, very long time. And it's there and places like that where we see development interventions actually taking root, and the ability for refugees to enjoy self-reliance with host communities to benefit, that too is important. Now, in places like Khartoum, where we saw that severe destruction and the like, step by step, it's going to be necessary. With 1 million people going back to Khartoum, as you heard from Ugo at the top, there's a need for basic services, need for water, need for health. We went to a hospital on the outskirts of Khartoum. They lack almost everything. So it's that kind of reconstruction, rehabilitation, bringing back basic services, where development actors have a much larger role to play than do humanitarian actors like ourselves. So this is something that across the country, it will be different depending upon the context. But there's not a moment to lose. And you just heard from my colleagues in terms of some of the partnerships with those development actors that are already making a difference, and we need serious scale up. Thank you.
Thanks. Stefano?
Thank you, Stefano Vaccara, La Voce New York Ital Press. First of all, I want to thank you for your briefing, and probably you are a testimony of why we have the UN and why we should have a UN for the next year. But my question is this for all four of you. Putting yourself for a moment in the position of a world leader, whatever from the US, China, Russia, or elsewhere, what would you do and propose to the UN Security Council today, not tomorrow, today, to make this institution more effective in responding to the crisis like in Sudan?
Please, did you specify to whom? No, it can't be that. Stefano, ask a person.
I consider all four of you very, very important. All your four of you, all your agency, the job that you're doing, it's very, very important. So either of one, I understand not all four can respond, but whoever will respond, I will be satisfied.
Okay, since Stefano didn't, let me start with Ugochi Daniels. If you could handle his question.
Thank you, Stefano, for the question. The Secretary General has already put forward a proposal on UN reform in the context of a humanitarian cluster, a peace and security cluster, and the development cluster. So my recommendation, if I had to make one recommendation to the Security Council, is to support the reform agenda that the UN system has put forward to meet the ever-growing needs. We've just spoken about Sudan in the context of a severe funding crisis. That would be my one recommendation, because we have come together as agencies to see how we can best be efficient, how we can be effective, how we can maximize all we have learned in over 70 decades of being actors on the ground in communities, working with local actors, as you heard many of my colleagues said. And we have brought all of that to bear in what the Secretary General has put forward to member states. So my appeal to the Security Council is to support this wholeheartedly, because the world needs this, and this is what the UN was set up to do, and it's what we do best.
And maybe I'll just jump in, taking the opportunity to compliment Ugo and highlight that for Sudan, I think our call to action is clear, but to highlight on the one hand, we'd be looking for member states not to enable and in fact to disable the war from happening in Sudan so that a ceasefire is possible, and then to invest in humanitarian and development efforts that are underway and proven to work in Sudan, both in terms of ensuring that funding is predictable, flexible, and provided on a long-term basis. Thanks.
Sudan, but you answered it in.
If I can.
Maybe I can build on Valerie's comment, because it wouldn't be, frankly, directed just at the Security Council, because I think you have heard from all four of us the need for peace. And it's not in our hands in terms of that political solution, but we deal with the aftermath of war, or what happens when civilians and families are caught in the middle. But it's the funding crisis, and we haven't emphasized that enough, I think, in our briefing. And let me just underscore, the humanitarian response plan is only a quarter funded. That means that there are millions of people who are going without. You've heard from us, the humanitarian and development interventions that can make a real difference, they need to be supported. The refugee response plan, where you have countries like Chad, South Sudan, Uganda, Ethiopia, that are hosting millions of Sudanese refugees. That's 21% funded. We are already almost in November. It's pathetic. We need much more support from member states in order to be able to respond effectively.
And maybe let me finish and build on my colleagues' comments specifically to Sudan. I think it's important to unify efforts to address the crisis and end the war, and build on the proposal of the quartet and work with that as a basis to move forward, as Valerie said, to disable the parties to the conflict and find a way forward politically, so that there could be the pause immediately, a ceasefire within 3 months, and a dialogue on a political transition. That's where the Security Council, working with the UN and building on those proposals, can make a difference. I'd like to also thank you for acknowledging the importance of the UN and how we represent the fact that we are on the ground, that our colleagues day in and day out are addressing humanitarian needs, are helping and supporting the restoration of hope, working with Sudanese organization by reestablishing systems in places like Omdurman, Bahri, in the area around Khartoum, where hundreds of thousands of Sudanese are going back to resume and restore their lives. And that's why, as Kelly said, Sudan's a big place. You can have an acute emergency in part of the country, and at the same time, there's people going back to try to pick up the pieces of their lives in places where there's relative safety. But the only way that they can have full safety is when the guns are silent and there's a political way forward.
Maybe one more comment from my end specific to Sudan, because I spoke in general. What I heard when I spoke to government officials was a request for the numerous international actors who are at play in the context of the war in Sudan to give the opportunity for peace to happen. So it's an appeal to the Security Council, but not just the Security Council, for all of the different actors who need to come around the table to be able to have the peace that Sudan, the people of Sudan, urgently need, for all the services that my colleagues have previously have already mentioned, but a real commitment to not just ending hostilities, but ending the war, so that they can have lasting peace.
Okay, Gabriel.
Hello, my name is Gabriel Elizondo from Al Jazeera English. I normally don't give personal opinions on these kind of press briefings, but I'll echo the comments of my colleague about tip of the hat to the work that you guys are doing over there in very difficult conditions and the worst humanitarian crisis in the world right now. So thank you for that. And I just wanted to ask about El Fasher specifically, and maybe to Valerie, but anyone else that might want to add to it. I know you have some convoys trying to get in there when you can get guarantees on security, but can you just give us an update on any sort of prospects for getting any sustained aid into El Fasher? And then also, can you give us an update on the situation in Tawila as well?
Thank you so much. I'm not feeling very optimistic about the prospects for the convoy to arrive, but we have felt that it is important that we stay ready to be able to send it in. So it would require support or agreement for safe passage, an agreement that it would be able to transit the besieged zone, and that has not been authorized. So we've been working at it for several months now, but not feeling very, very optimistic. Now, meanwhile, we continue to support through cash programs, local organizations inside of El Fasher, providing support to the people, and are scaling up also the community kitchens that we have in Khartoum inside of El Fasher. But the problem is that there's very little commercial support going in either. So the actual food that is, there's very little food available even to buy from partners who are inside but are struggling to support. So that remains a key issue, and it's why the population is mostly being supported. Most have left. There's only 200,000 to 300,000 people remaining in El Fasher, and the focus has been on supporting them in Tawila where they are. And as Ted was just there, I think he's probably best placed to speak to the situation in Tawila. So over to you, Ted.
No, thanks, Valerie, and thank you for the question. There's actually a UN interagency convoy that's leaving tomorrow. And it's going to go, I mean, I agree with Valerie. The prospects of getting anything into El Fasher itself are really slim. And again, that part of our advocacy is, again, to allow for access throughout the territory of Sudan, not just in the Darfur, but also in the Kordofans. But this interagency convoy, which is leaving tomorrow, is going to do a whole loop around Fasher and try to reach the people who have fled Fasher in a number of locations. First, north of Tawila in places like Kutum, and then going back down through Tawila, where there's 500,000 people that have fled Fasher and surrounding villages. So we continue to advocate for access to Fasher, but we're also taking steps to be able to access those that have fled Fasher and who basically have nothing. When I was in Jabal Marra yesterday in a place called Nertiti, there was another 3,000 people that had arrived the night before. They had come out of Tawila because Tawila is getting too crowded, and they literally are arriving with nothing. I mean, they're arriving with the clothes on their backs, and it's urgent that we reach not only those who have concentrated in Tawila, but as I said, Kutum, Nertiti, and the other places where we're starting to see concentration of those that have fled Fasher.
Okay. Yes, Genoa.
Yeah. Thank you for this briefing. This is Yun Zhaopan from China's Xinhua News Agency. My question is addressed to Valerie. You mentioned that 4 million people will receive assistance from WFP, double the figure of last year. But there are 30 million people are in need of assistance. So considering that the winter is coming very soon, how would you take measures to help other people, the remaining maybe 26 million people? Thank you.
Well, thank you for your question. And I mean, hence the dilemma I think that we're facing. That we count about 25 million, or half the population of Sudan, as being acutely food insecure. But most concern are those who are in a crisis state of food insecurity. And we have been working to scale up to reach the people who are most severely food insecure. And our target has actually been 8 million people to be reached. And we've been chasing that number. But frankly, we've now reached the limits, not of our capacity, but of our resources. So we can reach now, we have the operational wherewithal to reach 4 to 5 million people every single month. But the sad reality is that we're going to have to start retrenching that simply because there isn't enough resources coming in to sustain that level of effort, let alone scale up to reach more people. So that highlights the focus of the existing resources will be in the famine and famine risk areas where, as I highlighted, we've been able to reach 85% of the population in those areas. But for the areas outside of the immediate famine risk zone, we would need both a major step up of resources from many organizations, many member states to many organizations, but we will also need to be really leveraging a broader based development effort in order to help bring those needs down, because the humanitarian assistance, it's just not realistic that it's ever going to scale up to keep pace with the growing need. We need to be taking action, building resilience, supporting agricultural production where it can be supported, ensuring the basic services in Khartoum where millions of people are returning, as Ugochi and Kelly highlighted. That way we can stop the needs, the acute needs, from growing exponentially because the resources are simply not keeping pace with the needs. Thank you.
All right. I see no further questions, so I would like once more to thank our four guests. IOM Deputy Director General for Operations Ugochi Daniels, UNHCR Deputy High Commissioner Kelly Clements, UNICEF Deputy Executive Director Ted Chaiban, and WFP Assistant Executive Director Valerie Guarnieri. Thank you all for your briefing and for all the work you've done. Have a great weekend, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you. Good afternoon, everybody.